What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Waters, and welcome to No Life Metal. It's time for a Prog-Rock update. That's right. Going to be doing a non-metal, non-hard rock, mostly prog rock vinyl updates. So I'm going to get right into this. This first one was actually a gift that came in the mail. It's a surprise from metal theologian Aaron. This is the very first Eloy album from 1970-71. German prog band formed in around 1969. And this is their first album. This is a recent repressing on Music for Vinyl Records, Gatefold. Beautiful sound. This is Eloy are definitely a band that stayed prog. I mean, they continued to progress and change as time went on. In 70s prog was, my favorite stuff from them. But this early album is a little bit different than some of their later stuff, in that it's a little more, I don't know what the right word is for it. It's just a little more maybe psychedelic than some of the stuff that came out afterwards. Regardless, it's a very good album from them. Really enjoy it. I think the top is supposed to be like a trash can lid on the front cover, because if you open up the gatefold, you can see the inside of the trash, which is full of cigarette butts and a looks like a rotting cheeseburger or something in there. But yeah, very enjoyable record. If you like, that 70s prog, long songs, a bit of psychedelic sounds. And great musicianship. This album is fantastic, and this is a recent reissue, limited edition of 1,000 copies on green vinyl, individually numbered, 180-gram audiophile vinyl. So if there's only 100 copies, 1,000 copies, this should be fairly easy to find. They won't disappear that quickly, in my opinion. This next one I picked up for just a few dollars. This is actually Genesis related, in that it's Anthony Phillips, who was one of the guitarists in Genesis early on, and this is Private Parts and Pieces Part 2, Back to the Pavilion. I have Part 1, never owned Part 2 ever, I've always only owned Part 1. Quite enjoy it. Very mellow, melodic album, lots of acoustic moments mixed in with the electric guitar moments, very progressive, kind of weaves a tapestry of between, melodic moments and more, I don't want to say heavy, because it's not really, anything's really heavy. Maybe I should say more rocking moments. But yeah, this is the second part, and I picked this up in this odd bookstore I found in it's a store inside of a store, and in there they had some records, and I flipped through them, and most of them were ridiculously overpriced. There was people walking around with man buns and paying $30 for records that you could buy $5 anywhere else, and it was kind of funny. But anyhow, I did find this particular album in there, and it was only $4 in great shape, so I snagged it. Probably because they don't know who Anthony Phillips is. So good for me. Anthony Phillips, Private Parts and Pieces, Part 2, original release on Passport Records. Next up, this is one, I love this record. It wasn't released on vinyl when it first came out, but this is Yes, The Ladder. This album came out in 1999. Yeah. And it's, Roger Dean artwork, so they always have nice artwork. This is actually Roger Dean. This is produced by Bruce Fairbairn, who passed away shortly after producing this album. But yeah, this is a great album. This is, of course, Chris Squire was still around for this album. And original vocalist John Anderson was part of this original album, so you can see the gatefold, and it's just regular black vinyl, but you can see the center rings. But yeah, it's to me, this sounds like classic Yes. This is one of the best things they had done since the 70s, in my opinion. I like the 80s stuff too. It was very poppy, obviously, when they got Trevor Rabin as their guitar player, and they were going for a different sound. They were going for a more radio-friendly sound, kind of like Genesis were doing as well. And a lot of the prog bands in the 80s kind of went for that more radio friendly commercial sound. But with this album, it was I shouldn't say return to prog rock, because they had been doing prog before this one, but there's just something special about this one. It's just like Bruce Fairbairn said, let's put out a real Yes album, and that's what you get here. Just great classic Yes. So yeah, The Ladder from 1999 on double vinyl. This next album I got cheap. I'm a huge fan of this band, but I'm not a huge fan of this album. And I have it on CD. I hadn't listened to it in years. I was searching around online for stuff, and I ran across this one, and I'm like, I'm going to grab it. Genesis, Calling All Stations on vinyl. I had actually been watching the Behind the Music series on YouTube, the VH1 series, and they talked a bit about this album and how nobody gave it a chance, and how they didn't tour on it enough, and how they didn't push it enough, and it's a far better album than people give it credit for. I don't know. I tried again to listen to this album, and it's not that I hate it. It just doesn't grab me. It does nothing for me. I put it on, and it just becomes background noise. I don't pay attention to it. I listen to music a lot while I'm working, and I put this one on and went through record 1, side 3, record 2, and I'm listening to it, and I'm just like, yeah, this is just not a great Genesis record. It just doesn't have that Genesis flair to it. I mean, it's not the poppy stuff in the 80s. It doesn't have any of the hooks that they had when Phil Collins was still in the band. It's definitely not, the proggy stuff of Peter Gabriel. It's just kind of, mediocre rock, radio rock. And it just doesn't have the hooks, or I don't know. It just didn't appeal to me like I was hoping it would. I thought maybe I missed it, back in the day, and maybe I will. Maybe I, eventually I'll get my head wrapped around this thing, and and I'll dig it in the future. But as of now, it's just, I don't hate it. It's just not an album that when I want to hear Genesis, I'm going to pull out right away. Vocalist is Ray Wilson. The only other 2 members of the band left were Tony Banks, who was one of the main, if not the main songwriter in Genesis, and then of course Mike Rutherford on guitar. But I don't know. Maybe some of you disagree with me. If any Genesis fans on here, I'd love to know what you think about it, because to me it's just not a great Genesis album. It's mediocre for Genesis. It's not bad, it's just not great. It sits in between, kind of mediocre, and just not what you want to hear when you want to hear Genesis, at least in my opinion. Next up, this is another one I picked up very cheap, well under $20. This is Rush, Snakes and Arrows. Now, Rush's 70s stuff is my favorite stuff. They had that heavy edge on that, and they were still progressive. Geddy Lee had those very helium-ingested vocals. I just loved everything about the 70s sound. Right up to 80s, early 80s when they did Spirit of the Radio and Tom Sawyer and all those kind of songs. I thought that was great too. After that, and the keyboard started becoming more important than the guitar. And then when they started getting more proggy again, and I started getting into them again, and this is actually a very good album. But much like the Genesis album, if I get into a mood to hear Rush, I'm going to end up pulling out Caress of Steel or 2112 or Moving Pictures before I'm going to pull out Snakes and Arrows. However, I do think this is a far better album and more enjoyable than the Calling All Stations by Genesis, because this one I actually enjoyed listening to while I was listening to it. It's just probably not the one I would be pulling out first when I want to hear Rush. But regardless, it's a good album. Again, I know there's a lot of Rush fans out there who watch my channel and chat with me. What do you think of this album? I'm kind of curious to hear what you all say. Double album, solid album from Canada's Rush. And then this last one, this one's pushing it for putting it in a prog update, but it doesn't really fit into the metal updates either. So this is the new Angel, Risen, and I love this album. This album is jam-packed full of hooks. Now, someone may say, it doesn't. I've heard people say it doesn't sound like Angel. It sounds like Angel to me. I guess it depends on what you think of as when you think of Angel. If the first thing you think of is Tower and kind of that keyboard-oriented, progressive and slightly pompy rock. No, this is more guitar-oriented. This sounds more like Hell of a Band or On Heaven or As Is on Earth kind of stuff, Punky is in charge here. He's doing the songwriting. So, of course, it's more guitar-oriented than back when Greg Giuffre was doing a lot of the songwriting. Frank Domino sounds as good as he ever has on vocals. Probably not as high as he did in the 70s, but still sounds very good. But yeah, I really enjoyed this record. I've played this thing I've had it maybe 2 weeks now, maybe 3 weeks the most, and I've probably played it 10 or 15 times, literally every other day or so. I put it on again, and I'm just really enjoying it. I've heard some people mocking the cover, saying they didn't like the cover. It's just a picture of the band. I mean, just like every other Angel album had a picture of the band on the front. I don't know what the big deal is on the cover. But there's some live photos on the band on the inside. And not that I'm a big fan of white vinyl, or colored vinyl, but you got to admit, an Angel album on white vinyl is pretty cool. Yeah, so, I mean, Angel's back. I'm glad they're back after, successful tours from Punky and Frank as they toured together. I guess they just decided to put their heads together and put Angel back together and put out a new Angel album. There is a cover of Tower on here at the very end. I don't know if that was necessary. It's kind of cool. It's very good. It's not that far off from the original, so I'm not sure what really the point was. But the rest of the album, solid guitar-based hard rock from Angel. So there you go. Short but sweet prog-rock update. Appreciate y'all watching. Looking forward to talking to y'all in the below. Talking to y'all in the chat below. That's it. God bless. Stay strong.